So welcome. This is going to be a part 2 conversation. Our last time we were together, we talked about building in Babylon, and we have Joel with us today. He wasn't with us in that conversation. That was just Taylor, Hugh, and I. And so Joel, I think, has had a chance to listen to that episode. We definitely wanted him to weigh in on that. And then right before we hit record, he started sharing about a trip he was recently on. And maybe why don't you tell us a little bit about that? And also, oh, by the way, you got to listen to that episode, and we'll just use that as like a way to pick up. By the way, for listeners, if you haven't listened to that episode, we dig into like the actual mythological kind of cosmogony story of the beginning of the world story of Babylonians from the Enuma Elish, so like their old mythology. It is worth going back and listening to that to kind of get some context for things we're talking about. So we're probably not going to re-say that whole story here. So if you haven't, check that out. But Joel,
And we
good
use
to have
the
you with
word,
us, man. Let's jump into it.
we use the word what'd you say, cosmonic?
Cosmogony. It's like it means beginning of the cosmos, like Genesis and Cosmos.
Marmaduke or whatever. What was it?
Marmaduke.
Marmaduke. You missed Marmaduke, bro.
Yeah.
Game changer.
Marduk. Not to be using Mamadukes or whatever. Yeah, no, that's
Marmaduke.
I don't know if you watched the live version, Joel, but Hugh had a shot of Blanton's
I was losing my mind early.
mid episode when we started getting into cosmogony.
I think it was 9:30.
actually it was exactly when he said
words.
he was talking about friends posting about politics on
About
Facebook,
Trump.
and he
That's what it
turned
was.
around and poured a shot.
Got too stressful.
Yeah, he's like, you know what? I'm drinking.
You know what?
So-
When I was listening to that, in the previous episode, for me at least, man, my mind was exploding because I actually did grow up in an educational system that taught much of that you were saying. But what was interesting was it was in Christian school. I grew up in Christian school, and we did learn so much of that mythology. But I would say, whether it was intentional or not, where all of that was aimed was not at recognizing empire as a trans era force, but really towards a replacement theology that we ended up with something better, and it's America, than all of these, pagan things. It was
the new Israel concept.
It was very modernistic in that it was aimed at like progression, like we're getting progressively better, and the height of that was kind of the emergence of America. So anyway, it's just so interesting because a lot of that foundation was laid for me in the school system I was in terms of the actual mythology, but it was interpreted so differently. So anyway, those are my
But
thoughts.
just a quick point, and this to me is the core difference, is that replacement theology concept is still built on the idea that we can fix Babylon.
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
That we take dominion and that we can rule the world, and that we're colonizers, and it's all, even though it has these little, which to me is the genius of the powers, of the principalities and powers, is when they take a kingdom idea and they tilt it off axis just enough to where you can't see the difference until it manifests.
Right. Yeah, that's right. And I think too, if we see empire as this, really this force that's been working throughout, all of history, then we start to see some of the patterns, the same old tricks. And one of it is, the sense of self-righteousness in empire, right? So that's, every empire feels like it's righteous, in what it's doing. It doesn't really think it's perpetuating wickedness and evil. It thinks it's perpetuating what's right.
Yeah.
And so that's some of the delusion of it, in the middle of it, and always uses religion to prop up that, that sense of righteousness, right? It might be a different religion, but somehow the gods or God has said that this is right. And so empire is just in service of what's righteous in the world right now. And with all that to say, it's like, man, how we have fallen into that trap, in the time in which we live. And that was really some of the system that, education system I was exposed to was kind of this sense that, well, now we have a righteous version of empire. Now it's
Right.
us. But really, you're just saying the same stuff that everyone has said.
So
in their own time.
growing up in that, and then segue into, but growing up in that, do you feel like we did a good job of distinguishing between those two ideas?
Wait, I'm sorry, I'm not understand what you're
So
asking.
growing up in what you grew up in,
Yeah.
Which is basically replacement theology.
Yeah.
And because I've been accused of that before, like, oh, you're just talking about replacement theology. No, or the new Israel, or
Yeah.
no, this is not what we're talking about. So learning to articulate this message well, sort of in the style that Jesus did.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to do. So you kind of firsthand grew up in it.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I think we have to figure out like how to articulate some of these things. And I think you guys were in the last episode, in a way that is just broader than our own limited experience. And I think you're right, Taylor. Like, I think that sometimes we start talking about this stuff and people think that we're just hitting on like a particular political agenda in our time, or something like that. But it's like, no, we're actually talking about something that has existed throughout all of history. You know what I mean? That the people of God have always lived in the shadow of, and whatever they are, and to varying degrees have participated with it or lived as a prophetic witness within, right? And I think it's just the nature of like living in one of the strongest empires in our time, right? That there's a kind of blindness that develops, right? That
Yeah.
we're not, man, it's like part of the whole delusion of it, that empire centers itself, right? And a lot of times, even in the debates about politics or whatever, or how to interact with our society that come up in America, I do think we have a tendency to think that our debates are the center of everything, right? When in fact, like, it's actually just a small portion of how empire is at work in the world today. Like you just mentioned, I was on a trip, I saw some examples of it in another place. And I think it is such a small representation of how the kingdom of God is at work in subversion of empire too. You know what I mean? Um, and so for me, like, I just went on this trip. That's been some of the value for me. And I think for you too, Taylor, you mentioned, I'm sure you other guys as well, of seeing other places, is learning to recognize that, man, these things that are at work in every culture, at work in every place in the world, at work in every time in human history.
It
right?
smells the same.
Smells the same. That's right. In both directions, by the way, like, empire, and the kingdom, recognizing the things the kingdom begins to do in these places, right? I just think it's easier to see empire in cultures that are not our own. Like, we tend to, I forget who it was, maybe it's either like Shane Claiborne or Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove, I forget. They wrote a book on Benedictine rootedness, and they talk about how, like, they're talking about like demons in the South. I think they're from the South, if I'm not mistaken, but they're like, demons in the South, have a Southern drawl and drink sweet tea, and it's like, in every time, in every place, I could say that, about Western PA, or where I just, was overseas. It's like, we just don't recognize the demons as much, because they kind of take on the smell, the talk, the language of the place which was. So it's always easier to see it another place. And maybe some of the danger in that is that we can think we're righteous and they're the really evil ones. And that's some of the interpretation I grew up in. But that's actually not it. It's just that we're seeing empire clear, and in another place it's less familiar. Maybe it's less diluting. And hopefully that gives us eyes to see it in the context where we live, and work.
By the way, Joel, before you kind of go on to that, I think a lot of people that watch the first podcast,
Yeah.
the angst is, okay, but what do we do when we're
Yeah.
in these And like even this week, I was joking with these guys about whenever you find that people from your past churches that you pastored are posting stuff that just makes you want to go to the bottle again, so, you know, the the empire issue, it seems like not only is it always there, but the response, or at least the attempt to respond to it, is always the same. And so this one couple's leaving Oregon because it's just too crazy, and they're moving to Texas
Yeah.
because somehow they think that, and maybe their response is, we can no longer handle what empire's doing to our kids or our culture. So they flee to where they think the empire will be more favorable for them. And then the other option besides escape, we're trying to find the right empire to be under. I had two conversations this week from people that we've been coaching that both made the comment, it seems like you guys are taking over Alton. They use the word takeover.
Mm-hmm.
And I went, oh man, not even close. And they said it in a positive way, like, hey, if we do a brave city,
Yeah.
like we can take over and I had to remind them, no, you will never be able to take over. So
That's right.
I think by the time we're done here, we got to go back to the practical for people and go, is there another response, but besides escaping it or trying to take it over? And I hope we
Right.
get there somewhere.
Yes.
That's good.
Yeah.
Really good.
All right, fire away, Joel.
Well, what was I saying?
We're talking about your trip.
Well, your trip's important. When before
Yeah.
we were recording, we were kind of talking about
yeah.
how the contrast of empire and kingdom, and then the synchronization of empire and kingdom has been around since obviously before Jesus. But I was sharing a little bit about my time in Ghana. Me and my oldest son went to Ghana and spent some time with some friends there. We went over to Elmina Castle, which was the kind of birthplace of the transatlantic slave trade. And I don't know if y'all know this, but right in the center of Elmina Castle, within a rock's throw of the dungeons that they held slaves in the most inhumane way that I've ever experienced personally. Right in the center was their cathedral, was their basilica, was their little church. So they would worship. This is all true. They would worship the Spaniards or whoever was kind of in control at the time. They would worship while within earshot they could hear the moaning and the weeping of chattel slaves. And so that is a potent picture of the synchronization of empire and kingdom. But then it just became more and more shadowy as it moved out. And you were talking about how it's just the same everywhere you go. You just got back from seeing some.
Yeah, I was originally drawn to West Africa for a number of reasons, but on our first trip in 2019, we went very similar, Taylor. We went to there, which is, now it's like a United Nations heritage site, but it's this door that was kind of the last place, the slaves went out to North America. And, when we were there, the few folks I was with, I was there to pray with some people and just learn with them. But we read out of James 5, look, the wages you failed to pay the workers who mowed the fields are crying against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. And man, we just, we wept there some. I think some of the visceral experience of that had to do, with me living in an African-American community now, and really this particular strain of empire, that you're referencing, which is funny. On one hand, empire always does the same thing. On the other hand, this is embodied, right? It's embodied in cultures and stories. And so we can identify the particular strain that we live in, right? That we've been a part of. And so I think for me, some of the weeping for us was thinking about the connection to, living in an African American community currently that migrated from the South, that had lived in slavery for generations, that's connected to this story, in some way in West Africa. And it's all the same thing. It's all, the way that empire is at work in the world to do the same old things, but in particular ways. So where I was this time, I was with some friends, and I'm not going to name particular places or people because they aren't, just in really sensitive cultural context. But I don't know if you know this, there's some places in the world today where, and I'm sure you do know this, where not only does slavery exist in like an underground human trafficking secretive kind of sense, but also just really openly, supported still by governments in different ways. And so I was in a place where, kind of just embedded in the cultural system is that boys in numbering thousands, I mean, from like, let's say age 4 up through, age 15, are handed over, to religious teachers, some of whom are benevolent, but most are not, and use these boys to beg and basically bring in a quota in these urban areas every day. And if they don't make the quota, they're often punished in horrendous ways, abused physically or sexually. And it's a government protected system. I'll say it that way. It's like this whole way of being, which is like right out in the open, in the society, is really shielded by, the government. And so what it means is, every time I go there, I'm just reminded, and I think this will tie in, Hugh, to what you were saying about this question about like, how do we wrestle with what to do? When you're in the cities where I just got back from, it means that from morning till night, these boys are approaching you, right? Wherever you go. They're pulling on, your shirt, they're grabbing at your hand, and they're trying to get their quota because they know that if they don't, most likely something awful is going to happen. There are benevolent religious teachers, but a lot of them are not, and the utter helplessness of that, and not just for me, but for my friends who live there. I spent a lot of time processing with my friends who are working with these boys who have created a center, to take them in. They do constant wound care, because these boys are constantly getting wounded for, any number of different reasons. So they have a medical team there. They have a private space for them to shower, where they're safe, it's like this center, it's just one of the only places where these boys are going to feel safe. But I was asking them tons of questions because you just feel utterly helpless, in the face of this
Totally
culturally embedded, generational, religious and government supports, so it's supported by religious spirits, by political spirits. I mean, it's like you can feel the gods behind it, like enforcing this thing. And that anything you're going to try to do, I mean, you try to give them a coin, you feel like you're feeding the machine, that's gonna, just lead to more abuse. But honestly, my friends feel that way too, that are running the center and all this stuff. It's like, how do you help without, playing the game, kind of thing. But I'll just say this one thing, and then I'll just a reflective piece, and then, wherever you want to take it. But let me just start by saying that feeling of helplessness, it's why I like to take people there, because especially, and I'll just say it, I think especially Americans who feel like we are the righteous version of empire, I think we have an inflated sense of our own agency, of what we can do to change the world, of what we can do. And I actually left this trip with a great deal of hope, and maybe we can get into that some. But I don't think we'll ever get to real hope, without getting to a real place of helplessness, And that's some of why I like taking people to this place, because I want them to just sit in that for a minute. It's like, what would you do? Even if you moved here, what would you do, to fix this? And I think a lot of us who really feel like we can change the world and are still in that place, we kind of need the experiences and the environments that make us real. I'm not saying you have to go to Africa to feel that. I think there's plenty of places you can feel that here in the US and our own communities. But maybe it's just a quicker kind of shock value, to realize, like, man, I don't know what I would do.
But it's good to feel it.
It's good to feel it first as a
Yeah,
starting place.
I think Jesus modeled that too. He one of my favorite ideas of his form of discipleship, of like his kind of practicum, was just come with me and see what I see, and what he was walking into were those places. And I don't know how in your experience the responses have been, but this is a thought that's coming to my mind while you're talking. So between the three of you, John, Joel, and Hugh, you guys have about 60 years collectively of protest against empire, like life as protest. And correct me if y'all see another kind of reaction, but in the real face of this tension, I've always seen one of three responses from people. One, the most common, is just get in where you fit in. Get yours one way or another. Find the best, usually there's a good heart behind it. Find the best option for your family. Huddle your family. We're going to kind of live a generational life together in this place. And that's that. So in a sense, give in to empire. Say, it is what it is. We're waiting on heaven. That's been the most common Western paradigm of the gospel. The world sucks. It is what it is, and we're waiting on heaven. The second is what we talked about earlier. We're going to actually build a wall, build like a little Jericho for our people, because we're better than these outcast, destitute people. People can take offense to this if they want to, but this is kind of this was the original kind of heart behind the suburban movement. Is we want to get away from those who have been infected by the world.
But even the church that actually tries to get all the things of the world in the campus. So we'll have our own coffee shop. We'll even have our own fitness, and
Yep.
so we'll just house it all here.
We'll house it
in the
all
bubble.
here. Yeah. But this third way is what we're trying to at least investigate. You guys have been doing it longer than almost anybody that I personally know. And we're going to be right here. We're going to be right in the mix of it all, praying for protection, for God to be near us, for courage, for bravery. But we're going to build tables, and we're going to build, hopefully uncover and architect better cities within our cities. So that's where we are now. After all of that setup is to go like, and maybe John, you can, if anything is just like firing, if your pistons are firing at all. But Joel, I mean, one of the main reasons last episode we said, hey, we got to get Joel back on here for this one is because I've seen it firsthand. I've seen how your life is a protest. And how that manifests itself, because I do think that a lot of people, a lot of friends are kind of going, but what what does it look like? What does that third way look like?
Mhm.
Because I don't want to just fall in line with Babylon, but I also don't want to colonize my own little spiritual city, so to
Right.
speak. Or that's not the best way to say it. My own little kind of enclosed kingdom suburb where the
Mhm.
lost and the poor don't have access to me.
Mhm. Right.
Okay, so there's a couple things I want to try to put together, and I don't know how these really fit into those three things you laid out. I feel like they do, but I was thinking about one of the pieces that I think really stand out to me from, well, let's start here. So Joel, you said, you know, it's in that space, it's very easy. You just feel powerless. Like, what can be
Right.
done here? This is
Right.
like every principality is working together in harmony for this like unbelievably horrific, like hell on earth kind of like
Open abuse. Yeah.
construct, right?
Mhm.
And then like what is to be done? And I just want to like pause for a second and be like, if you are listening and you're inclined to like care about justice, temperamentally, like you're not okay with bullies, you have a sense of like power and power dynamics. I just want to know, like, because like if I'm honest, deep in me, I have to acknowledge the feature of the Babylonian mythology is because it's a combat mythology. It
Right.
believes at its core that you can establish peace by war. That because and in me, as you tell this story, I'm like, well, we just need to start killing these mofos. Like, just, you know what I mean? Like it's in my heart. It's just like violence
Man
is
on fire.
successful as a mythology, redemptive violence. We believe, if we're honest, in the myth of redemptive violence, which is at the heart of Babylonian mythology, because it just seems like it's what works. Pick up
Yeah.
a big stick, right?
Mhm.
And it's like,
Go to work.
and this is how we establish peace. This is how we make things right through force and through dominance and through violence. And so, one, I think it's important to like acknowledge, and in what you laid out, Taylor, I think, well, that's probably closest to like build a wall, get away. So it's us and them, but then it's like, and then we're gonna go in, right? And so I want to put that back because I think what Taylor's laying out is like this third way is actually a way of, it's not that, it's embodying another kingdom value structure system or working to, right? And not giving into that pull toward violence, because and then that brought me to like when you started, you said we have an inflated sense of our own agency. I was like, well, that's that, right? Like
Yeah. Right.
I'll just go make it happen.
Right.
And so I wanted to like go back to this because like the life as protest is an embodiment of something other than violence and is coupled with powerlessness. And so I just wanted to use that as a setup to like invite you to reflect, but all of you back
Yeah.
in on it.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I was thinking while I was, on this trip that I don't know, I don't think I have any answers, but hopefully the outcome of that sense of helplessness, and Taylor, I've heard you say this a lot, is this desperation for God,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, is this desperation for a savior, and not just a savior that we can somehow moralize our way out of this mess, but a savior that can actually do something, to dislodge these powers, like it's power encounter, we need something, but I think God's power is such a, different kind of power. And just as you were saying that, John, I was thinking about how when I was in graduate school, I had a professor who had been a community organizer, and he was actually teaching us some like protest methods. And he was like an old guy that had done it for a long time, and he shared this story about how they were working on behalf of uh, some public housing project here in the States. I don't remember what city it was in, but it was infested with rats. And, the residents were just being terrorized by these rats, filling the building. No one was doing anything about it. And people had tried to protest and all this. And this guy, is a follower of Jesus. And he didn't have a real like mystical way of talking, but you could tell he had prayed, you know. And he said one day it occurred to me, it just an idea. And he said they trapped as many of these rats as they could. And they walked into the apartment manager's office while he was there, and they dumped these dead rats onto his desk. So his desk is filled with these dead rats.
Baller.
And essentially, that apartment manager took care of those dead rats within a week. I mean, of the live rats within a week, in the apartment, exterminated, and was getting help for the residents. Now, here's what I noticed about that story, and I'm making a point here. It was nonviolent, except to the rats, you know what I mean? But it was nonviolent to humans, It was incredibly creative, It was kind of scary, like that's kind of like mob kind of stuff, you know what I mean? Like to dump dead rats onto, And as I heard him telling that story, I knew what he was trying to communicate to us was that our protest methods, and I think it's a function of Babylon, have become so unimaginative. It's like, it's what you're saying, Taylor. It's like on one hand, we do nothing. And on the other hand, we think that just getting angrier and you're right, John, like, yeah, inflated sense of our own agency. It is that spirit that's always going to lead to war, right? But before that, we think our angry posts, our outrage, our right, that this is the only righteous way, to respond. And I just think, and then we moralize to each other about if we've responded in the right way. And if we, all of that feels to me like Babylon. I remember when he was sharing that story with me, I was like, see, that actually sounds to me like it came from another place. You know what I mean? Like that sounds to me like, and I don't know that it changed Babylon. I think we've said many times we can't really, but man, it sure helped those residents, right? Somehow, and I would say somehow the compassion of God, the justice of God manifested in that story. It took care of those
I
rats.
think it would be helpful, like when we say we can't change, because now I say a lot, we can't change Babylon. That's probably not even accurate. We can't fix Babylon.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I think we have to start saying to each other, no, but we can make changes. Like life is protest. Like Taylor has said it a few times, it made sense to me that the things that we do as protests, although they might not be wildly successful numerically or whatever, we fix, Portland, Oregon. They are a mirror for the world to see that there's another world. So there's a legitimate witnessing. So when Jesus talks about go and be my witnesses, it is not just go door to door and say something. It literally is your life. I love that life as protest. It shows the world that there at least is a realistic other option for them to consider. And I think the witnessing is a legitimate thing, but when we start talking about what John was talking about, like warfare, I mean, there is enough scripture that seem to indicate that our posture should be that we are in a war, that we take up weapons of warfare, and they're different. So it says it's completely different. So you can't war the same way the world wars. And, the passage that always haunts me that I tend to get mostly angry with the Lord in is when he says, I'll build my church, gates of hell will not prevail. I'll give you the keys to the kingdom, and then you'll bind and you'll loosen things. So I grew up always feeling like, no, we can actually make some significant changes. And I do want to say to our listeners, we cannot fix Babylon, but we can potentially subvert a lot of things. And in that subversion, people see that there's another world. They start to get hope again, and they at least won't just pick the first of the two options that we mentioned.
For some reason, the picture that keeps coming to my mind is the Greeks and the Trojans. Like there's these two these mythological manifestations of our response. Is the Greeks were we're going to take over and we're going to rule and reign the whole thing. And the Trojans were, we're going to build walls and create our own safe place and live in harmony and peace forever. And we're saying there's a third way. And the active kind of life as, or hope as, protests, which is our origin as in some ways as Protestants, but it's not, it hasn't manifested the way that I feel like Jesus taught us for it to manifest, is to begin to uncover all of the things that we're talking about in a practical way.
Yeah.
Through economy, neighborhoods,
Right.
you know,
Right.
I mean, it happened again to me last night when I was at a thing in St. Louis. It's so interesting to me, and y'all probably get this in your kind of daily rhythms when you interact with people if they don't know your whole story. Just knowing that I'm from Birmingham, Alabama, knowing that I've only been here in Alton 4 years, and I meet people, they don't understand. They're like, why in the world would you move your family there? Which always opens some kind of conversational, you know, pathway for me to say, well, this is sort of what my wife and I believe and what we've been trying to practice for years. And that's what we're saying is this is an act, this is a posture of activity, of action, of what was it? I'm trying to kind of jump back to what you said of saying we're gonna of showing a shadow. We're gonna actively show a shadow of what is to come, of the world that is to come, and the world that is to come leans into those who are pushed out, leans into the fatherless, leans into the hurting and the lonely, and the broken places.
I'm wondering, like, and just hearing this, I wonder if, like, when you hear the stories of the early Christians turning entire regions upside down, I wonder if it was just they gave enough shadows that it just kept getting more people to lean away from empire. And then the weight of all those people going, no, we do have hope.
Well,
so
because I think we over romanticize that. Like if you step back for a minute from all of the preachy stories that we've heard over the years, we realize that that Rome and Greece and India, Thomas, or you know, Thessalonica or Corinth or wherever, they're all still ruled by Babylon. It's not like they changed anything.
Yeah.
It's we have this history. Our history as Jesus people is building, architecting little shadows, little kind of help me out, guys, with articulating this well, but little pictures of the kingdom come.
Really communities. The shadow was the communities.
Yeah.
What they
so I, just to talk about that being tangible. So, I got to hang out with a guy for a couple of days while I was there who actually grew up as one of these boys. And eventually escaped, and then eventually was taken in by some Christians, right? And this is just the paradox that I know we're all familiar with, right? Like, number one, it can't be over romanticized on any level, even in terms of his life. Like, you can tell this guy still is walking out a life of incredible trauma, like just what he was raised in, all this stuff. I mean, you can tell it's still hard for him to talk about, parts of it. So it's not this just like magic, that just made all his problems go away or something, right? And yet along the way, there were people, that showed these little shadows. And here's the thing, I bet like if we interviewed them, they would probably feel like they've made little to no difference. You know what I mean? Like they know this guy's story is cool, but there's still all these boys, like running around, right? And yet you couldn't ignore how this one story, in this place of all of this, oppression and slavery just shouted so loud, like even with its imperfections, just of what could be different. And I realized and these shadows, by the way, are what's being made when there's people available to do wound care for these boys, or there's providing like private showers where they can clean up and be safe, and giving food. On one hand, that stuff seems so obvious, and I don't know if it's like changing the system or anything, but man, I was there at that center and I'm just thinking, these are these shadows in rapid fire, for like every kid there, and you're right, Hugh, it's not just individual, it's an alternative community that's forming in those, at that center. It's like a whole different place, where people are treated a different way and relationships are, reflecting something different. And in that way, it's a protest. But I recognized in the team there something that I would recognize in our team here in Aliquippa, and it's that there is this sense sometimes, just this, we fight for hope, right? It just feels like we're making no difference at all, right? And the longer you do it, maybe that feeling compounds, like even more, because there's so many hard stories, right? But as an outsider to their team, even though I'm familiar with all those feelings in my own context, I'm looking at them and I'm thinking, this is incredible. Like, I don't know if you're like changing the system, or whatever, but man, I can smell and feel the presence of God here, right? The kingdom here. And it's not because this team is looking like heroes. It's, like they're not. Like you can kind of see, like, man, are they even putting a dent in this? But it's because they're just in their embodied day-to-day life, like in this place, they're evidencing something different, than the empire that's all around them. And that was incredibly hope-giving for me. It is when I come see you guys in Alton. It is when I come to Tampa. It made me think about how we see empire clear in other places. I think sometimes we see the kingdom clear too, than the fight that we're in, and maybe some of that is by God's design, so we stay desperate, in certain ways. I don't know. But I was in some of the team members' homes for Good Friday, and we just took communion together, just sitting in the living room. And I told them that in recent years I've been drawn to Matthew's account of Jesus's crucifixion, which is as gruesome as the others, except that there's the description of the veil in the temple ripping in two, but then also of those tombs opening up and holy people, coming to life on the day of his crucifixion, right? Which is just weird. I have like 1,000 questions about that. I'm not sure like what all that means, But I just felt led to pray over this team, like the violence of hope, that on the worst day, arguably the worst day of empire, that somehow God has not left us without hope, and that hope does take on the characteristics of violence. It breaks open tombs, it rips a veil, but not against people. You know what I mean? Like somehow against the artifacts of death and empire itself, right? And even on that day, I'm not sure that it, like those things, the veil ripping, those few tombs opening up, it's not like it turned, it's not like it fixed everything like magic, like how we talk about revival or God's kingdom, whatever. But man, what a picture though, right? Of like what God is doing. And that's how I felt about that center. That's how I felt about this guy. It's like a tomb opening. And on one hand, a tomb opening isn't all the tombs opening. It's not everything getting fixed, but man, it's a big deal too. That like that like God could do something, you know? Yeah.
That's such a good picture of like Hugh made a contrast earlier, which I thought was really powerful, between escaping and conquering.
Hmm.
And like what you're describing feels like the real alternative, the other way, the remaining. And what comes to mind immediately is just, maybe because we have access to this history in the South in the United States, but like the sit-ins. Like,
Yeah, right.
I'm just trying to order some coffee. I'm
Right.
not running away, right? But I'm not coming in with waging war, but I am waging war, like what Hugh referenced, like the whole war
Yeah.
thing. But like our battle's not against flesh and blood, aka like the restaurant owner or these police that are coming here, like any individual here, but actually the principalities and powers that reign, that hold these people captive in these behaviors, even
Which,
those that are, and why someone like King was like, we want to set both the oppressed and the oppressor free. We recognize that they are like captives to these like spirits that reign. And so just this all goes to like, seeing the work of setting these tables as, and understanding it as like nonviolent direct action, like that we set a table in the presence of our enemies that welcome in the stranger. And these are like that's why a lot of times I'll refer to like the work as like a rehearsal of
Right.
the things to
Good.
come, but also as like a flash mob or a performance art. Like we're gonna do this right here in the presence of the world, like as you stage a protest, right? Like this is a demonstration of
Right.
of the world to come, the way things could be, should be, an invitation. And in some very real way, like I was listening, or I read these old accounts of the Christians in first century Rome, that were being, or first, second century really, that were being killed for not, like, literally just like not burning incense for the to the spirit of empire, basically to the emperor.
Yeah.
And there's actually documentation, and these judges are like, what is wrong with you? Like nobody even cares. Like it doesn't even mean anything. Just like light a match, burn some incense, you can go about your business. You can live that life that you want to live. Like we don't care. Why would you do this? Why are you making this so difficult? Like literally light this on fire and move, and which most would do. And then you have these defiant ones, these kingdom oriented ones that are like, yeah, I'm sorry, you're gonna have to kill me.
Like,
I
nah.
would literally rather die than acknowledge the spirit of empire, than to give any gesture toward the spirit of empire. And it was this ridiculous gesture, this nonviolent gesture, and happily lay down their lives over like, I don't contribute to that thing, to that system. I don't participate in it. And just think, man, what a demonstration of our battle is not against flesh and blood. And if blood is going to be shed, we're willing for it to be our own, like Jesus was willing for it to be his own. And we embody this other way, this other spirit. But those stories you're telling, I'm just like, the whole time, I'm like, this is the demonstration.
John, I think this is why, like, when you even talk about the prayer, okay, so our prayers or our warfare is not like the world, so we pray. The classic Christian way that they view prayer misses all the nuance of this, because it means like a prayer meeting or something. Where when we talk about like what we're doing here, we'll say we're like a bit of like a Trappist order. And remember, the Trappist order, ora et labora, the prayers to do the work, the works are how we pray. Even the clinical idea of what it means to be an intercessor is you take something that you care about to God, but as you take it to him, you offer yourself as an answer to the prayer.
Mm-hmm.
So tie this all in is, the works that we do, whether it's reclaiming a building or renovating a house on a corner that needs, a place for kids to hang out, whatever it is, that is our warfare. We don't just escape or try to take over, but we stand and we build these works. We build tables,
Mm-hmm.
but that is our intercession, and stuff does begin to move on this thing. So it's not a hopeless venture. We will lose far more battles with what we can see than we will win but we are still winning. Like, it's not just like a made up deal. We make movement, and there is a subversion to it. So I don't know. I love Joel's, the idea of the hope of this thing, because we wonder ourselves at times, even Joel, when we're riding down to see Dr. Perkins together, we're all talking about what are we doing? Why are we doing this again? And to be with this man that had this hope at age of 94, that mostly had losses.
So here's some scripture that is kind of flooding while y'all are talking. John, what you were saying makes me think of, and we've talked about this before, but this was the core of what Jesus was talking about in the Sermon on the Mount, with turning the other cheek, cloak and tunic, carrying the bag. It was a sit-in, right? It was a protest. It wasn't as it's been interpreted, and I think we should reference that often. Of, look, he's teaching us nonviolent subversion, not against a person, but against the spirit of empire. I thought of the parable of two different parables. The talents is kind of an introduction to what we do, like the rehearsal, the flash mob, the performance art, but even more so the 10 minas. If y'all are familiar with that parable, like this, everything we're doing, it carries on into the next life. The idea of cities, the idea of building, of cultivating, being given kind of authority, binding and loosening. But for some reason, this one popped in my head. I'm wondering if any of these ignite thoughts in you guys. But if you're familiar with the Shema, the Lord our God, how's it go? The Lord our God, the Lord is one. He says, bind them on your hands and your foreheads, right? I don't know if that's symbolic, but I think it's super symbolic. Here's why. Because our hands are our symbol of action. Our foreheads are our symbol of thought or mindset or paradigm. And what's interesting to me is that's the same places. Those are the same places on the body where the mark of the beast is. It says that the mark of the beast will be on their hands and their foreheads. I don't believe it's any mark or any microchip or something like that. I think it's a decision. I decide that my actions and my mindset will be synchronized with empire and Babylon. The Lord our God, the Lord isn't one for me. So I'm going to work with my hands for my life here now. I'm going to think with my mind for my legacy here now. And I submit myself. I will burn incense to the emperor. So all of these threads of, if brave cities, if you will, like whatever you want to call it, but for us, that's kind of the language we use, is just a carrying on of that Shema teaching. Like, here are my hands, here's my mind. The Lord our God, the Lord is one. We want to be your remnant. And then the last thought is the testimony. See these image bearers, Joel, in West Africa. I don't know the whole story. I don't understand how our work transfers fully. But I lean towards, or I tend to believe, that every shadow that we unveil, and as John says it, every table that we set in the presence of our enemies, is a testimony that we believe in something intrinsically and eternally greater than us. Right. And when this moment comes to cry out to Yahweh, like Yeshua, the I am, the one who has always been, they hearken back to that shower, man.
Yeah.
They remember that shower, and they remember that wound care,
Mhm.
and they remember that. I know it sounds trivial, but they remember that coffee shop and that community center and that job that was provided for them. These are all kind of active ways that we're protesting in our context. They were, and again, I know it could sound a little like hokey, a little preachy, but I'm telling you, it's actually more powerful than I can articulate it. They remember that bike
Right.
and that bike shop, and how there was no logical motivation for this guy to do what he's doing in his life with his skill set and his gifting, to give himself to this town, to this community, to this people. What burns us out is thinking that we're going to change it all. And that's what we mean when we say you can't change Babylon. But you can, what did you say? You can build a better city within Babylon.
I just think about like even the looming darkness that people live in. It's like a humongous airplane that, well, we have the eclipse coming in a few days. It's a big eclipse over the world, and the world feels that. But the shadows that we create are like a better way to think about a shadow is just it's a little space of shade. So the shower is a little bit of a shade. When we build a table in a neighborhood, it's just a little bit of shade.
That's what it is.
And that's doable. I can't fix the looming darkness, but I can create some shade.
Yeah. It makes me think too, as you were talking, Taylor, I was processing this while I was on this trip. I was just thinking about how Paul there says, these three remain: faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. And how, in that's making more and more sense to me the longer we're on this journey of helping our own community. But then, when I'm in West Africa, how it really feels like, man, some days you have to fight for hope and faith, faith to believe that this will, change, or hope, for the future, and I think we also need to acknowledge that even this conversation, we started at the beginning of this by saying, people can feel like they just want to run away or they get paralyzed. Like we do. I want to acknowledge that even this conversation on some days, and today is one of those days, maybe it's because I actually slept well last night, or I, just got back from this trip or whatever. But there are times when this way of talking to each other gets me fired up enough, right, to serve in these ways in the next week. This conversation is doing that to me today. And I just want to acknowledge that, because I don't think it's always this, just overwhelming feelings of being paralyzed. We actually rehearse these things to each other. We perform these things in front of each other, and it gets us fired up. It's why we got to do this stuff in community, and that's not just hype. It's us reminding ourselves of what we're doing here, in the first place. And so we need each other for that. But there are the days when, man, hope and faith just doesn't feel in reach. The love, which is the language of the kingdom, it's the power of the kingdom, it's the movement of the kingdom. It's always accessible in our wills, just to choose to run that after school program one more day, or to, like, love is action, and even in weakness, right? Like we can.
And what I tell my kids all the time, Joel, is most of the time it doesn't feel like sacrifice.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like faith. It feels like wonder.
Yeah, meaning.
Like, I get to do this, bro.
Yeah.
I've done the other stuff. You kidding me?
That's why, like, I even think about my friends leaving their town in Portland to go to some town in Texas. And I just think, do you guys realize how much work you're actually doing to get out of that empire you don't like to, like, it's all work. even our work, you know, with what we do, it's all work. There's a weightiness to it, but I would rather have this fight than
That's
that
right.
other fight of trying to escape or,
That's
you
right.
know, build a wall where nothing bad happens to me and my kids. That's, I mean, that's a lot of work too. So,
Yeah.
You know, you brought up the like faith, hope, and love, and I was thinking along the same lines of like well, interestingly, what you're saying about love, like I could choose to do it another day. Um, so Kierkegaard wrote a book called Works of Love, and he goes through like that you shall love your neighbor, and he goes through it like word by word, and like a chapter like to emphasize like you shall love your neighbor as yourself, or but he really gets into that you shall like, and he's like, how often do we really, because we think about love as a feeling, we think about love as a behavior, but like very rarely, if ever, if you like scan poetry and all these writings of love, like do you think of it as duty, and like dutiful love, like I will choose to act this out of like an obedient kind of allegiance to love. But with the faith piece, this is interesting because you were talking about like you say like I believe it'll go this way, or and we think of faith as like a belief set, and I actually think incidentally this is part of what we get wrong like throughout conversations of faith and evangelism and all these things that we believe, or many believe that it's like an intellectual assent to some set of ideas that, you know, I believe those bodies got out of the grave, or I believe this happened on the third day, or born of a virgin, or whatever creedal statement that we're going to make. And I was really hit by this book called Dynamics of Faith. I read this during a time of like really wrestling with my faith, kind of a dark night season that I went through. And Paul Tillich wrote that book, and it's one of his more accessible books. Some of them are pretty hard to read. This one's not. I recommend it, but and this isn't like a direct quote, but he lays out these two guys. This is at least how I remember it. And he's like, this guy says, I believe all those doctrinal statements, and he goes on about his life. And this other guy's like, I'm not sure about any of those, but he's up all night, just like it eats him up. Like it's so important to figure this stuff out. And he like can't eat, can't sleep. It's just like he's obsessing. He's like, I don't know about this. He says, which one of those is involved in in a dynamic life of faith? And comes down and says it's the guy that doubts them all. It's the guy that's up all night wrestling with them, not the one that assents to these, because faith isn't just intellectual assent. It's not just some emotional state. It's not just some behavior or something that we do. And what he uses the language of ultimate concern. He's like, your life has lots of concerns. There's things that are really concerning, things that are less concerning. And then like, but there is something that is ultimately concerning. And then he argues like when we misalign that with what is ultimately important, that's what we would call idolatry. Like if money is ultimately concerning to you and everything in your life is being sacrificed to that pursuit, well, that would be called idolatrous faith. And in this framing of this, there is no such thing as a person without faith, because every person has a concern that trumps every other concern in their life. And so then he's like, so then we want to align ultimate concern with what is ultimate, unconditional, and eternal, right? And this is like, and it's actually something that is beyond us. Like it almost like we are in its grip. You are in the grip of your ultimate concern, like period, whatever that thing is. And it's like allowing that thing, because ultimately, and then our role in faith is actually like an ecstatic reaching beyond our intellectual capacity, our physical ability. It's like, it's more than I can do. It's more than I can imagine. It's more than I can even think to ask. And so our faith is, and that's why, like, I've always liked actually the hands up kind of thing that people do when they worship. It's because it's one, it's a posture of surrender, but two, it actually looks like a gesture of like, I just can't reach far enough. And I actually think that like really resonates in these moments that you're talking about where I feel fired up again. It's like faith being renewed, not like I believe it's going to go well, but I can't help but lean into this thing that is both drawing me and inviting me and that I long for. And then also like, and then in those times where like the lights go out, you shall love your neighbor. It's like you remember that happened, you long for that to come back, you pray for a resurrection of that faith, but the greatest is love, because I can just choose to set this table, to show up again. And I do think that is what gives us the ability to stay, to be in the presence of hard places, to live in the dark. Because to be a light in the darkness, is that something we just choose to do? Yeah, I'm just gonna be light in this dark place. I'm gonna muster the energy. It's like I actually think we're like allowing ourselves to be used, which is why I like the way you guys are talking about. Like, you pray, like, God, do something here. And also, here is I offer my body as a living sacrifice. If you can use this in any way to do anything in this place, I'm yours. Do it.
Yeah.
All right. So, from Marduk to, how about this as a title? Like, I actually think that these two podcasts will be the ones that I most often say you have to, like, to understand Brave Cities, you've got to go start here.
In the first episode, you also said, I think Taylor said, that there's 9 people on the planet will be interested in this conversation.
I think we're up to 13 now.
Okay, good.
Which is more, that's one more than
I was
Jesus
like,
started. So we're good on numbers. What if we called this one Shadows, Shade, and the Subversion of Love? That's long. Can any of you do better? I did like the Life is Protest, how we started, but
I think that's good.
I like it.
Shadows, Shades, and Subversion of Love. That's our response to Babylonian bullshit.
I think we got to talk, just kind of keep hitting on this every other pod, one thought I want some help with. I want to understand why some of my, like, some men and women that I hold so dear around the country, around the world, especially this country, why they're so concerned with politics. I guess it being such an important year of politics, but I keep reading these posts or these articles or whatever, and I'm like, man, what do you have to do with Caesar? Like, what is it about Caesar, or this representation of Caesar, this red representation or this blue representation, that you're so concerned with?
Taylor, I think it's important though, like, to remember, and even in like Jesus' day, you've got like these zealots. They're like, there's something that has to, like, there is a very real, that in the lens of that ultimate concern, I do think the temptation toward like zealous nationalism might actually be one of the highest, like, temptations away from something that transcends that, because in our day-to-day lived experience, this is what we're referring to as the powers, and to recognize there is a king over kings. There is a one that transcends these. It is a gift and a grace to be able to see that, right? And I do think for most people, one, I think we're recognizing we do still live in a Babylonian construct, and a Babylonian mythology is a mythology of nationalism and redemptive violence. And if we are not, if you have the like gift of like, I know that you've been pulled out of the matrix, and you can kind of see it for what it is. And there is, I think, like, rather, and I think the right posture is compassion when we see that, because for the people that are possessed by they believe, and act out the belief that this thing is what's important, and without recognizing that the majority of what this is a monopoly of violence. Like, it's like, this is the thing that wages war. 60% of the money you put into it is funding of violence. It is a mechanism of violence and domination. But we think somehow that thing can be leveraged for the world that we dream of. And And genuinely, it is like it is to be in the grip of something like a religious position.
Mm.
Yeah.
John, I
Can
really
I,
like. Oh, go ahead.
no, Joel, go ahead.
I really like what you were saying there, John, because I'm thinking about Jesus's inclusion of the zealots, in his disciple, his ability to work with them, right?
Mhm.
Like the disciples who, leaned
Yeah.
that way. And you're right, it's like he could see something in their desire to live out a transcendent narrative that is actually right, but
But
misdirected or
not quite. Yeah.
that's right,
And
that's
sin
right.
is to miss the mark, right? It's like just
Right. And
let's
and
tighten
redefining
your aim a little bit.
greatness.
Yeah.
Yeah, redefining greatness for them. And when you mentioned compassion there, what just came to my mind was um I think the reason these, talking about coming back to these podcasts again and just continuing to talk about this, I think I think a place where I can feel compassion for people is that they're living for too small of a story, and we're talking about like how do you
That's
keep
right.
on going? How do you keep on, even people doing good community development work, good justice work, man, we got to talk about this cosmology, these big
That's
things,
right.
because these small stories will not sustain them. It will wear them out and rob them and ruin, steal from
And that's not something you can reason with somebody. Like a
right.
small cosmos can only be shattered, like a shattered thing, because that's like the apocalypse of a world is
Mhm.
by being shattered by a greater, being swallowed by a greater world,
Yeah.
or like snapped like a spell,
Right.
rather than like, let me just explain to you why there's something greater. It's like there's the need for like uh what an encounter with transcendence.
Yeah,
Love it.
that's right.
Yeah.
Hey, so can I attempt a pastoral moment for a second?
Please.
I'm going to take off my hat. Okay.
Are
I
you gonna
never
lead an
do.
altar call right now?
No, maybe, but no, I just think about like, maybe the 13 people listening to this, think about the exhaustion, the lack of hope, the depression, maybe I'll just go back to Babylon.
Feelings of failure.
Yeah, just all that failure.
Yeah.
There's a term that I was taught by my father-in-law out elk hunting where I was so amped about finding an elk to shoot that I would hang my head out the Jeep as we were driving up these logging roads, like literally straining with my face to try to find an elk before somebody else could see it. Because when we would all bail out and start shooting. But I remember I just loved hunting so much because I had one kill and I was just so amped about it. I remember he said, "Hey, bro, pull your head back in. You need some softer eyes." And we talked about it. It's a Native American idea that they would teach the young warriors
Mm.
that if you're looking for something in these, in the woods, you just see all these colors and shades and whatever. The best way to see the nuance of what you're trying to really find is you have to soften your face. You got to quit being so intense about it. And that if you can relax, you'll actually see it faster. And I think this is maybe, a little bit of a moment in history where
Mm.
to be politically oriented right now is an intensity that nobody can keep up. And if you've been wondering if you can try to fix Babylon or take it over, maybe it's time for you to like chill out, bro. Like, soften your face, soften your eyes. I think that's what love does. I think love,
Mm.
it just settles you, and you don't have to fix anything. You don't even have to succeed, but
Mhm.
it's an invitation to just live another day with a nice, smile on your face, little twinkle in the eye, and go, yeah, I'm just going to live a life of protest for myself and for my own relationship with the Father, and so that the people I love the most will live under the same undisturbedness that I have. Oswald Chambers would talk about, like, you really trust in the Lord when you take on his undisturbed face. Because when you try to picture Jesus looking at what's going on in the world, if you look at him, he's not wringing his hands or, doing this. I think if you really look at the face of Jesus, he looks calm, and he actually might even have a little bit of almost like a smile, like a grandfather or grandmother might have in the middle of a depression, you know. So take on the undisturbedness of the Lord, the love that, you know, that he gives us, and relax,
Yeah.
brothers and sisters, because we do win.
Mm,
You know,
Mhm.
we are winning. So
Mm.
man, that was good.
put my hat back on now.
Feel better. All right, shadows, shade, and the subversion of love.
It's not bad.
Good one.
Be a good country song.
That sounds like a
No, it's more like
elevation worship song.
yeah. Hey, Joel, thank you. Thanks for,
Good being with you guys.
you know, bro, every time you talk, like, and it's born of your 20 years in the same community. And we've talked, you've had a lot of dark moments too, and good reason to, but you have such a wise, thoughtful way of approaching everything. And we're grateful that you're part of our team, and yeah, just thankful, bro. Hope you have a great day today.
Thanks, man. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
thanks for doing this.
yeah. No, I needed this today, you know, maybe especially after seeing what I saw in the last week. It's like, this
Yeah.
is, yeah, we got to have people to talk this stuff through with, you know.
Yeah.